Hello and welcome to this discussion video, really, a discussion on Big Finish. Yeah, a topic I talk about quite a bit because, hey, I review quite a lot of their products. And this video, it's been on my mind for a while, actually, whether I should do it or just leave it and just let it fester in my mind. Really, because of recently I found a few issues with Big Finish, a few things that are niggling me and a few things I'm just finding a bit tedious with Big Finish, because I've been a fan of Big Finish for 3 years, which I'll talk about in a minute, really, because I thought this would be quite a nice thing to look back at Big Finish, you know, because there are two main eras of Big Finish. There's the Gary Russell era and the era we're in now with Nick Briggs, and there is a clear divide between those two eras, so I thought I'd look at both eras, not do, you know, which is better, but essentially look at the eras, what do I like about those eras, and a few little negatives, and look at the current state of Big Finish and maybe the future, really. So we could say this is a bit of a negative, a moaning video, but it's not really. You know, it's fair to have a few criticisms, but I'm just going to class this as an observation of Big Finish. So I think a perfect place to start is how I got into Big Finish. Where did I start? And then we'll work our way through the eras of Gary Russell, Nick Briggs, and a few little problems I have with current Big Finish. Now, I knew about Big Finish from getting Doctor Who magazine in 2006 and seeing little previews for Red and Something Inside. That was when I sort of first became kind of aware of Big Finish, but I wasn't really exposed to the actual products they've released until I think 2008, when I got Doctor Who magazine and they had a freebie called Cuddlesome, and then a year later Doctor Who Adventures released The Mutant Phase, which I enjoyed it a lot. And I thought nothing of it, and then 2013 came along and I managed to get Blood Tide, quite a bizarre story, to kind of kick off your Big Finish collection, really. But it is a cracker. It's the Sixth Doctor and the Silurians, and it's just a magnificent story. And that was it. That was me done with Big Finish until Night of the Doctor rolled round, and I think this is when most people got a little taste of the Eighth Doctor and whet their appetite, and people were like, I think I'll get some Eighth Doctor audios, because obviously we were all aware that he was this audio Doctor. So the first Eighth Doctor audios I got was the Zygon Who Fell to Earth, and the Army of Death and the Silver Turk. Those were my sort of three Eighth Doctor adventures, which I love dearly. And then I got Lords of the Red Planet as well, because I'm a big Ice Warrior fan, and that is basically the genesis of the Ice Warriors. And I made this sort of vow, I guess, at the time, that I would only get the Eighth Doctor adventures. That soon went out the window as soon as I found out the 1 to 50 stories were going out of print. You know, each week you could guarantee that a story would be out of print, and this was great for a newcomer of Big Finish, because the 1 to 50 section you could buy on CD for £5, so it was great for people getting into Big Finish because you could soon build your collection up. But obviously if they were out of print, you had to go on eBay or Amazon, and that was quite a task looking back on it, and it's kind of a relief looking back on it, because it was quite a stressful time hunting down some of these audios. I mean, the most difficult one to get for me was Time of the Daleks. That was an absolute pain in the backside, but thankfully I've got it now. And this leads us on to the next point, Gary Russell, because this was the main area of Big Finish I focused for many months, really, the 1 to 100 area, because that was just something so special about that era of Big Finish. Right, the Gary Russell era. Now, obviously, Bernie Summerfield happened before Doctor Who came to Big Finish, but we're going to talk about Bernie Summerfield, a bit later in sort of a negative way, but don't worry, I will talk about Bernice. So we best kick off with a sort of a summary of the Gary Russell era. Now, Gary Russell was the executive producer. He script edited stories from the Whiskers of Terror to the Year of the Pig, so at my estimate he did it from the beginning till around 2006, and you know, produced a few spin-offs like the Cybermen series, Dalek Empire, etc. But let's just focus on the main range for now, because this is when we can see the difference between Nick and Gary Russell. So if we kick off with the first Doctor Who release, the Sirens of Time, which it just makes perfect sense to have a multi-Doctor story to kick off Big Finish, because that's certainly going to grab the punters and the fans, because who can, you know, not resist a multi-Doctor story? It's an instant thing for Doctor Who fans. You know, as soon as an anniversary happens, we want a multi-Doctor story. Now, the Signs of Time isn't exactly the best example for Big Finish. It's you know, it's still very ropey. The story itself, the cliffhangers never get resolved, which is quite a big thing for Doctor Who. The cliffhangers are very iconic to Doctor Who, so you could sort of say that's Gary Russell's sort of way of sort of playing around with the story format, because that's the thing with the Gary Russell era, and I'll talk more in depth when I look at some experimental stories, is they are experimental. They twist stories thinking, okay, how can we make this unique and interesting to listen for the audio media. So Sirens of Time is a decent story, and it's quite surprising people stuck with Big Finish, because it's not exactly the greatest story, but yeah, the early years of Big Finish are just truly underrated, and this is why I sort of want to discuss some of the early years of Big Finish, really. So then okay, it's time to go on to the experimental audio, some of the experimental Big Finish that they've done, especially this time, because this is when Big Finish was less structured, where you don't get the trilogies. You'll get either Sylvester McCoy 1 month and Peter Davison, or Colin, then you'll get your McGann series. So there's one thing, but yeah, time to go on to the story. So first one I'm going to mention is the Whiskers of Terror. Not a story what gets talked about really, and I feel like this is the first story when Big Finish started to nail the audio stuff, because this story is catered for the audio medium, with this basically having this sound monster, and it just can only work on audio. So Whispers of Terror is one of my first mentioned, and then we have this sort of sidestep into the expanded media, where we get an exploration with the Virgin Territory, where we get a sidestep into the Virgin Territory with Shadow of the Scourge, with, you know, featuring Ace and Bernice. And I believe that was originally going to be a New Adventures, but it just didn't get past the planning, I believe. I may be wrong with that information, but yeah, then we move on to the other Virgin New Adventure story, which is the Dark Flame, which is one of my favourites actually. It's a kind of a guilty pleasure audio, because not many people like it, but I've got a strange liking to it. It's just very good. It's got this sort of dark cult feeling, get somebody stabbed in the eye. It's very nitty gritty, and it's the 7th Doctor probably at his best. It's a very good story, really. And of course Big Finish have kind of continued the New Adventures line with the New Adventures of Bernice, and doing the novel adaptations as well. Again, moving on to sort of more expanded media, we get a sidestep into the 2D universe in the form of comics, where we get the Holy Terror, one of the Big Finish's Holy Trinity, featuring the 6th Doctor and Frobisher. The story itself by Rob Sherman, so need I say more? Starts off quite light and fluffy, but then it takes a dark turn, and it's a very good story, definitely one to check out with. So it's a very nice sort of Big Finish catered for all mediums, to try and get people on board, whether you like your books, like come and see this. We've done an audio with a character, you know, from the books, and try to make it like the books, but just on audio form. And if you're a comic fan, you know, you got the Holy Terror, and yeah, it's kind of sad that Frobisher didn't really take off, because I don't think the Holy Terror was well received back when it was first released. I'm not sure, but I've got a feeling it wasn't, and I think over the years it's grown appreciation, really. And yeah, we get stories what sort of muck up with the format, like Sirens of Time, where we get Creatures of Beauty, which is kind of sort of a mishmash, where you get like part 3 is part 1, part 2 is part 4, so it's kind of mucking around with the episode format, and it's kind of a Doctor Who story which has been cut and just mumbled all together. So yeah, we've got to give a lot of admiration for them sort of playing around with the format, and that's very experimental, if I can get my words out. Now, another thing what I think is quite quirky and makes it kind of worth putting on the experimental side is Winter of the Adept. Now you might be wondering, why? How is this experimental? Now, Andrew Cartmel, a figure predominantly known for the 7th Doctor, and the whole Cartmel master plan, I guess that is, you know, reckon to fame really. him writing for the Fifth Doctor. Now, the contrast between 5 and 7 is completely different. You know, 7th being this grand manipulator, and 5 being this innocent, youthful person. So, yeah, it's very interesting to see Andrew Cartmel write for the Fifth Doctor. So that's one reason I've put that there in the experimental side, just to see Andrew Cartmel and sort of Big Finish saying, alright then, we'll give you a story to write for the Fifth Doctor. And then another one is the game. This, again, playing with a format, with this being a 6-parter, with each part either being, you know, 10 to 20 minutes long, and I think like the running time is about 115 minutes. So yeah, there's another example of them playing with the format. Then we get this quite bizarre release, which is Doctor Who and the Pirates of the Lostest Sailor. Now the reason why this has made the list is because it's basically a Doctor Who musical. If that doesn't say experimental or mental in this case, I don't know what is. Yeah, it's a very odd story. It's a fan favourite. It's not one of my favourites, I'll be honest. It's not a story I particularly love, but for some weird reason people love it. And if you want Colin Baker singing, then definitely check out the Gallifreyan Buccaneer. Yeah, a very interesting story. Not one of my favourites. Yeah, and then we get some more sort of nitty gritty stories like Red, which is based off sort of I believe like a true story, sort of true events really, but it's not to the, you know, every detail is exact. And you've got another sort of nitty gritty story playing with a format, which is Live 34, one of the fan favourites again, and I'm going to say I'm probably the only person who actually doesn't like it. I'm going to be honest, it's one of those stories what everyone seems to love, but I just can't get into it. Now this story is basically done like a news report, with sort of news interviews from like the Doctor, Hex and Ace, but it's done in the style of sort of a news programme. Yeah, definitely one to sort of check out, and it's definitely one to listen to in a car, because I think you'll get more of an appreciation for it, I think, because obviously you listen to the radio in the car, and whether you have the news on or whatever. So yeah, that'd be quite a good one to listen to in the car. I haven't done it personally. I'm just going off J. Arkham Review sort of advice. So I may try that in the future and see whether I enjoy it. But yeah, Live 34 is another one to mention. Now we move on to some other things what Big Finish did. Now we did do some arcs. Obviously they're not major arcs, and they're not stories where you have to listen to every story to understand. Like sort of the Web of Time thing with Charlotte Pollard, even though I would say listen to the 8th Doctor stuff all in order, because it's just a lot more fun and you get to see the progression of Charlie and 8. But the Web of Time arc is fantastic, and that does lead into Zagreus, which, like I said, was first referenced in Project Twilight, one of my favourites. Can't get enough of Project Twilight. And yeah, Zagreus, a prime example of Big Finish being experimental, because that is one bat crazy audio. You know, you've got Colin Baker, no, the Fifth Doctor is a vicar, the Brigadier is this cat, I believe, no, as a bird, I believe. It's been a while since I've listened to Zagreus, but from memory it is just absolutely bat crazy. You know, you've got Lisa Bowman playing a cat, you've got Sylvester McCoy being like Uncle Sam, I think. It's just a really crazy audio, and it's 3 discs long, and yeah, and you get to see Paul McGann become even more Swiss cheese, I guess. Yeah, I need to re-listen to Zagreus, and of course it does feature John Pertwee. The next arc we get is the Divergent arc. Yes, a very controversial arc for many people. And you could argue this is when Big Finish got too big for their boots, as Zagreus sort of led off to the Doctor being sort of pushed into this reality with no time, and not in our dimension and universe. Because, yeah, the Divergent series works like that, because there are some absolute crackers and there's some absolute stinkers of stories. So, without further ado, let's talk about this sort of diverse series. Because it sort of works up like this. There are different zones within it, different portals leading to different sections. So the Shirt Zone will lead into the Creed of a Croman portal, then yeah, it's all these different portals taking you to these different zones on this planet. And that's kind of the best way to sort of describe it, really. So, starting off with Scherzo, the iconic one, a story what, again, I don't really want to talk about it to spoil it, but if you love Heaven Sent, you will love this, as it is basically a two-hander between the 8th Doctor and Charlotte Pollard, and Paul McGann and India Fisher just nail it. It is absolutely superb. Yeah, absolutely brilliant story, and there's some really great jump scares in it, and they still get me to this day. And if you wear headphones, then RIP headphone users when you listen to it. Yeah, Scherzo, absolutely classic. Don't want to spoil it because it is just one of those stories you don't want to be sort of spoilt for yourself. And then you get an absolute stinker, which is Creed of a Croman, which introduces this Keris, this shape-shifting alien. Again, I've got to say that is a very good idea, having this sort of shape-shifting alien, which again works and well for the audio medium. Then my next sort of recommendation, and I do not recommend Creed of a Croman because it is absolute garbage, Natural History of Fear. Again, like Scherzo, I don't want to spoil this story. It's one of those stories where you just have to go and listen for yourself, and you just got to read the synopsis and realise this isn't your typical Doctor Who story. So this is when the ideas just get a bit batshit crazy, really. But yeah, I'm going to talk about some of my favourite ones now. I'm not going to talk about some of the dud ones. So we get the story like the Faith Stealer, which is a very interesting idea, having this different faith zones with people trying to convert people into their faith. And you could say that this story is kind of relevant to today's society. So yeah, very good story, that. And then we have the last, yeah, a very good story. If you like bleak Doctor Who stories, then you'll like the last. So yeah, that's a brief summary of the Divergent series, and quite an old arc, what you get. So I'm going to talk about the Villains Trilogy, because Scherzo was a character piece for 8 and Charlie, but then we have this sort of series dedicated to the villains. So that contains Omega, Davros and Master. Now I believe Omega was originally going to feature the Celestial Toymaker, but for some weird reason the plan just fell through and we got Omega instead, and they are some brilliant stories, especially Davros and Master. They are some very great character pieces for those monsters. Master probably is my favourite out of the three. It's just very great storytelling, and Davros is basically a little precursor to the I, Davros series. And another little thing to mention is the Dalek Empire series, well, quadrilogy, even though it's not really linked. I think the only linking thing I can really think of off the top of my head is the Daleks, and that starts off with the Genocide Machine, first ever Dalek story by Mike Tucker. And yeah, it's a very good story, very underrated. Yeah, very good story nonetheless. Now the second story, possibly my favourite out of the series, well, out of the 4 stories, is the Apocalypse Element. It's basically the 6th Doctor in the Time War scenario, and yeah, it is absolutely brilliant. The Daleks are absolutely ruthless. They will stop at nothing to achieve victory. Even you've got the Dalek mutant fighting, you know, even if a Dalek gets blown up, the mutant will fight. They are just how Daleks should be. They're just relentless. It's just magnificent, and the plot itself, you know, the Dalek plot itself is very 1960s. Then the next one is the mutant phase, which I've briefly talked about, which is kind of good. Yeah, nothing stand out, but it is a good story, with these weird killer wasps, and I believe from memory it has the TV-21 Emperor Dalek. So yeah, another little nod to the expanded universe stuff there. And then we end with Time of the Daleks, with the Daleks quoting Shakespeare, which is a very novel thing to have, and it's a bit like Evil of the Daleks with the time corridors, and it gets a bit messed up with Shakespeare. And yeah, it's very interesting story by Justin Richards, and yeah, very interesting nonetheless. So those are some of the experimental stories, Big Finish. Now on to some of my personal favourites. Now I'm not going to mention some of the stories I've just mentioned in the experimental section, because like I said, there are some favourites like Apocalypse Element, Master, Dark Flame, etc. Some of those stories, so I won't cover those again. So yeah, let's kick off with the Fearmonger. The reason this is on one of my favourites is because it's basically 7th Doctor and Ace put into a 3rd Doctor story, and it's just absolutely magnificent. Really love the Fearmonger, one of my favourites. The Marion Conspiracy, basically the start of the Colin Baker master plan, the start of the redemption of the Sixth Doctor, where we started to see a lot more softer side, and the introduction to Evelyn Smythe, who is basically your nan travelling in the TARDIS, who everybody loves Evelyn. And I will say this, if you want me to do another Big Finish years covering the companions, then comment that down below, and that will be the next Big Finish years I do. So yeah, Marion Conspiracy, fantastic story. Then we have the Specter of Lanyon War. Quite an odd one, quite underrated, but I love it because it just creates some great imagery with your head. You've got the Sixth Doctor and the Brigadier, and that's just great to hear those two interact with each other. Fires of Vulcan is basically the Seventh Doctor in Pompeii doing the Fires of Pompeii, but it's a lot better. I do prefer that. That's probably my favourite Seventh Doctor audio. I'm going to say that's my favourite Seventh Doctor audio. Then we have the Eighth Doctor series. Yeah, like I said, just check out everything that Paul McGann's in. It's just brilliant because everybody loves the Eighth Doctor, and it's just listen to those and it just feels like a little series. You know, even Minuet in Hell I do like. It's not the weakest, and it's just great to hear the Eighth Doctor and the Brigadier. And of course I'm going to mention this Project Twilight. I've mentioned it enough. It's fantastic. Go and check that one out. Brilliant. Get to see the Sixth Doctor really tested. Cold It's very good story, and if you like David Tennant, you want to check that out because you see David Tennant play a Nazi, and David Tennant is he does pop up regularly in Big Finish. You know, he was in the Unbound story Exile and Sympathy for the Devil, playing this grumpy quite aggressive unit soldier, and he's in Medicinal Purposes again from the Gary Russell era. Fantastic story, very bleak story. That is where we see sort of an alternative if the Germans won the Second World War. That's Cold It's. Primeval, a very good character story for Nyssa as we go back on Traken, and it explains why Nyssa keeps fainting, and it's basically the Caves of Androzani but with Nyssa. You get to see the Fifth Doctor sort of heroic sacrificing side. I absolutely love it. Yeah, brilliant Fifth Doctor audio that is. Another Fifth Doctor audio I've got to mention is Spare Parts. Re-listened to this recently and reviewed it on the Whovian High Council. I'll put a link in the description if you want to check out my thoughts on that audio. Again, like I said, the Eighth Doctor stuff, it just keeps on getting better and better because you've got, you know, Chimes of Midnight, absolutely fantastic story, perfect to listen to at Christmas, and my personal favourite Paul McGann audio, Seasons of Fear, featuring the Naimon. And if you think the Naimon can't be redeemed, check out Seasons of Fear because it is my favourite Eighth Doctor audio. It's just fantastic. It's got this nice heart-and feel with the Doctor darting off to all these different historical places. It's brilliant. Jubilee, yeah, inspiration for Dalek, and yeah, brilliant story. Highly recommend that. And yeah, Shirzo, like I've said, Juggernauts, brilliant story. It's a great sort of story what slots in between Revelation and Remembrance, and it sort of explores the rise of the Imperial Daleks, and it features the Mechanoids, and it's a very good story. Brilliant story featuring Sixth Doctor and Mel. Quite a bizarre one this one is, and it is Unregenerate. Yeah, it's a very interesting story. Not a well regarded one, but I think that's a bit of a guilty pleasure one, to be honest. Then we have the Terra Firma, where we see the Eighth Doctor return to our universe after the Divergent series, where we get to see this sort of comeuppance and sort of the after events of Remembrance of the Daleks. So if you love Remembrance of the Daleks and you want to see what happened after Remembrance of the Daleks, definitely check out Terra Firma because you get some fantastic scenes between the Eighth Doctor and Davros. That's some of the highlight within the story, just having that interaction between those two characters. And then we have Other Lives, where we see the Eighth Doctor, Keris and Charlie put into other lives essentially, and it's a very good, pure historical story. It's a brilliant story. I really do like that one. And we have Night Thoughts. No, not the podcast I do with J. Arkham Reviews, which again I'll put a link in the description for that if you want to check out that podcast. Yeah, very good, creepy Seventh Doctor story and a very dark twist. It is very perfect for Halloween listening. And my final recommendation from the Gary Russell era, I guess is Time Works, one of my earliest Big Finish stories. Absolutely adore that, and yeah, it's absolutely brilliant, and the music in it is just superb. So those are some of my recommendations. I say a few. There's quite a right time to conclude the Gary Russell era. So personally, I love the Gary Russell era. Like I've said, I love the sheer craziness of it. I love the experimental side. I mean, I forgot to mention this story in the experimental side of the stories, which is Flip Flop, a story which you can listen to in either order and it will still make sense. So there's another one, just having less restrictions, because Big Finish is quite restricted now because of the BBC, and you know, because Doctor Who wasn't really a big thing the time when Big Finish was getting going. It was off air. This is, you know, the Wilderness Years part 2, I guess. So there was less restrictions, so the BBC was like, oh yeah, you can do whatever. So there was less restrictions, so that led to more creative storytelling, which was just great and just gave us some of the most iconic things, because this is the thing with the Gary Russell era. When Big Finish do, you know, your top 10 main range stories or whatever, you can guarantee that practically half of that list will be Gary Russell stories. You know, you got the Holy Trinity, you got Chimes of Midnight, the Holy Terror, Spare Parts. You know, those are always going to be on the list. When people say, can you recommend Big Finish, those stories are always going to be recommended to you because they are iconic. You know, Dalek, you know, Jubilee being the inspiration for Dalek, you're instantly going to check it out. Scherzo, there are just, honestly, the Gary Russell era is probably the most iconic part of Big Finish in terms of the main range, because that's where the iconic stuff lies. Granted, that's had time to build up a legacy, but I feel like it's a well-deserved legacy, what it's built up. And the thing is with this is there is no sort of there is no structure. That's what I'm trying to say. There is no structure to it. It's not very formal. You're not gonna get a trilogy. You know, granted you did get the villains trilogy, but you got a different Doctor and a different villain, so it's not the same thing with a different Doctor like the Master trilogy, where you got a different Doctor and kind of a different Master. But yeah, that's what I like about it. That 1 month you could have a 5th Doctor story, the next you could have you know, a 7th Doctor, and the thing is they alternate with companions. You know, you weren't going to be stuck with, you know, a TARDIS team what you didn't like for 3 months. You were, you know, if you didn't like one TARDIS team, you guarantee the next time that Doctor appears in the main range he'd have a different companion. So there's a positive there on that side, but there are negatives. Like I said, the experimental side, some of the stories didn't pay off, and of course you're going to get crap stories like Necromantia and Creed of a Crowman, but that's beside the point. And another negative I'm going to say, and this is kind of painful to say, is the character of Ehrman. I really don't feel that she worked, in the sense of, I'm just looking at this in the perspective of Planet of Fire and Cave of Androzani. Now what made the 5th Doctor's demise and death quite gut-wrenching and quite heartbreaking is that he's only just met Perry, and he's willing to lay down his life to a person he barely even knows. You know, he's only just met her, and he's willing to sacrifice his own life. Now that's what makes the 5th Doctor's demise great. And if you have, you know, the 5th Doctor and Ehrman and Perry stories, it kind of lessens the impact of the 5th Doctor's demise, as, you know, he's had so many stories of Perry, so it makes sense that he gives his life. So it kind of ruins the demise of the 5th Doctor, Ehrman. And I haven't really experienced many Ehrman stories, so I might change. That might change, you know, once I've listened to a few more of his stories, but I doubt it, because it kind of lessens the impact of the 5th Doctor's death, really. So yeah, there we go. That's a Gary Russell era concluded. Now let's go on to Nick Briggs. Nick Briggs, yes, the executive producer from 2007 till present. He's still executive producing right now as we speak, I guess. So yeah, the way this section's going to work, look at how his era sort of changed with some things there, and then some recommendations and the current state of Big Finish. So yeah, Nick Briggs continued to sort of experiment with the format, with him sort of doing these 3-part adventures with having one half-an-hour sort of adventure tacked on at the end of that release, which started from ID to sort of Wishing Beast, and then it became sort of on and off with like stories like Time Reef and Kingdom of Silver, which kind of worked, and I find them quite good. Like Urgent Calls is quite iconic for those sort of half-an-hour adventures, and that sort of, I believe, kind of led into the anthology releases, even though the first anthology release, I believe, was Circular Time. Yeah, so those were sort of Nick Briggs' sort of little test in the water with experimenting with the format, really, and we sort of got the sort of another experiment with having this sort of the anthology release where you get sort of you know, 4 half-an-hour adventures, which again have worked quite well. You know, like You Are the Doctor being, you know, one of those stories being interactive, so it's an interactive audio, which was quite fun and quirky. So yeah, that's kind of experimental, kind of reminded me back to the Gary Russell years, and they're quite a lot of fun, the anthology releases, and you kind of wish that one of those stories became full length, because you think they're great little stories. But yeah, great little short collection of short stories they are. Then we have like the Locum Doctors trilogy, because now in the recent years we get sort of, it's not really a multi-Doctor trilogy, but it's, yeah, I guess because it features different Doctors, it is a multi-Doctor trilogy, which kind of kicked off with the Locum Doctors trilogy, which was kind of a flop in many people's eyes, because it was kind of utilising companions what don't get seen in the main range, you know, like the first 3 Doctor's companions, which was quite a good way to sort of get them in the main range, but the stories just sadly didn't support them. My favourite probably being the Last of the Cybermen, even though it is a bit of a regurgitation of either of the Daleks. The Defectors with the 7th Doctor and Joe Grant was a bit of a disappointment for a Pertwee fan. But yeah, it's good. And then Secret History was very good. It felt very Hartnell-esque, and yeah, it was probably the second best from the bunch for me. Yeah, it was a very good story, that, actually. But yeah, it kind of lost me in the second half, but that's that. But the main structure for Nick Briggs's grand Big Finish main range empire is trilogies. Yeah, this is where Nick Briggs brought uniformity, and this is when Big Finish kind of grew up, where it wasn't them fans just mucking around going, wouldn't it be cool to do this? It was very much down to a business point of view, as it worked cheaper for them to record a batch of stories with Peter Davison. You know, it just worked out better for them financially to record them in bulks. So the trilogies worked in terms of a business and financial point of view, as you made sure your consumers picked up all 3 releases just on the off chance that they all linked together, which is a bad thing, because if you were, you know, wanted to cherry pick some of these stories, you couldn't cherry pick the release you wanted, so you either had to sacrifice, you know, getting that release, or skipping it until it becomes a bit more of a cheaper price. So yeah, it kind of restricted you as a consumer. Now, I would say the trilogies have been successful for the most part, as, you know, most trilogies do sort of link, but of recently they don't, and I'll talk about some of my favourite trilogies when I go on to recommendations. But yeah, when Big Finish hit 200, it was kind of a soft reboot for new listeners. It became a bit more friendlier, because obviously of the previous couple of releases, well, previous, you know, 50 releases or whatever, there was a lot of arcs, and sort of when it reached sort of the 200 point, they thought, you know what, we've got to do a soft sort of reboot and just forget about the arcs, tie everything up before 200 and let's move on afresh, which was great for new listeners, because you just got to look at the Black and White TARDIS arc, because that dragged on for quite a bit, and it's kind of an arc I don't really want to explore without having all the audios, because it's quite a big arc. Really, you know, it started in Magic Mousetrap, and it sort of, I think it continued right up until like Gods and Monsters, really. And yeah, the trilogies, like I said, some of them link, some of them don't, but of recently they don't link. I think the last trilogy what linked from memory was the 5th Doctor E-Space one, but yeah, I suppose you can sort of cherry pick those ones, really, and yeah, you can still understand the story completely fine. But yeah, like I said, the main range has had sort of a rejiggle with format of, you know, this year, because, well, since the 200 releases, you haven't had any arcs. It's very much been self-contained stories with the occasional throwaway line that will link into the next story. But yeah, like I said, this year the main range has had a bit of a shaking up with trying something different, with the main range having these 1 hour stories, you know, having 2 1-hour stories. So you had like Dalek Heart and Alien Heart, Dalek Soul, you know, Vortex Eyes, Cortex Fire, and Shadow World, you know, Shadow World and World Apart, or something like that. Which, for the most part, I think they work. They're very nice, sort of refreshing things, because you know, to some people the 2-hour format might not be good, so they're ideal for new listeners, those main range stories. So there's a little bit of a positive. Right then, on to recommendations. Yeah, there's quite a few again. Yeah, I'm going to be doing some trilogies and some sort of standout releases as well. So my first recommendation, I guess, is The Company of Friends, which is basically 4 short stories featuring 4 different companions with the 8th Doctor. So you've got Bernie Summerfield, Fritz, Izzy, and Mary Shelley. Some great stories within there, and just some great experimental ideas, and some very nice to have the 8th Doctor with some different companions. Really, then we move on to a trilogy what I've just mentioned before, which was the Stockbridge trilogy, which started off with the Castle of Fear, containing a classic monster. And if you love Monty Python and the Holy Grail, this is based on the 5th Doctor in that scenario. It's an absolutely fantastic story by Alan Barnes. I absolutely love the Castle of Fear. It is a magnificent story. And the second story in that trilogy is The Eternal Summer by Jonathan Morris, which is a very good paradoxical story, very creepy in parts, but it is very good. Yeah, very good story that is. Then we have the final story, Plague of the Daleks by Mark Morris, kind of the weakest of the trilogy, but it's just, again, it's another good story. It's not your traditional Dalek story, and I will say the Daleks do sound very 80s-ish within the story. So yeah, I love Plague of the Daleks. Then we move on to, again, one of my favourite trilogies, which is the Klein trilogy. You know, like I mentioned in Colditz, she was first introduced in Colditz, and then we have this trilogy, and which she span off into another trilogy and got Unit Dominion, what have you. But in this trilogy we have Thousand Tiny Wings, Survival of the Fittest, and The Architects of History. Now, Thousand Tiny Wings is, again, definitely in my top 5 Sylvester McCoy audios. It's by Andy Lane. It's a brilliant story. It's, you know, a base under siege, sort of, well, it's a house under siege, and it's a very good story. It's very creepy, and yeah, I absolutely love it. It's just threats coming from all directions. Then we move on to Survival of the Fittest, which is a 3-part story, but then you get a bonus story, which is Klein's story, which does feature Paul McGann. Now, Survival of the Fittest it's kind of like the Web Planet. It's kind of an ambitious story, but it just doesn't work. Really, I'm not really a fan of Survival of the Fittest. It's probably the weakest of the trilogy. I think I give it a 7 out of 10. So it's not bad, but it's all right, really. And Klein's story is a really great sort of backstory for Klein, and it's got Paul McGann, so you're gonna love it. Then the final story, Architects of History, featuring the Salations. A very good story to sort of end off the trilogy. It's by Steve Lyons, so of course you're going to expect good storytelling. Then the next trilogy, which is subsequently the following trilogy after Klein's trilogy, which is the Old Jamie trilogy, which started off with City of Spires, which is one of my favourite 6th Doctor audios. It's just brilliant, and just seeing the 6th Doctor encounter Jamie again is brilliant. And this is one of the cases where you have to listen to the trilogy in order to understand it, because of the whole sort of flow without it. So then we have Wreck of a Titan, which again, very good story, and you know, we see Jamie become the companion again, and it's a very, very good story. I really do like that from memory. Then we have Legend of the Cybermen, where we see the 6th Doctor and old Jamie reunite with Zoe in the land of fiction, which creates some very interesting idea. And part 1, the end of part 1, is just really creepy. Just, oh, beautiful. Absolutely love Legend of the Cybermen. Then we move on to some other releases. The Silver Turk. This was again one of my early Big Finish releases. Just magnificent, by Mark Platt, and just absolutely superb, really creepy. You know, it really lends itself to gothic horror because obviously it features Mary Shelley, who obviously, arguably the person who started sci-fi and sort of, you know, a prolific gothic horror writer. You know, obviously, you know, it's basically the Cybermen, but with you know, it's a sort of Frankenstein with a Cyberman twist on it. Really, it's absolutely great and marvelous, brilliant story. That is. Then we move on to the Burning Prince, start of a sort of a trilogy again, with the Akron Pulse and Shadowheart, all set on this sort of planet. But the Burning Prince is probably my favourite. It's by John Dorney, so you can expect a good story. And just the end of part one is phenomenal, and the threat within the story, these weird creatures, I can't remember the name, but they're absolutely lethal. They just rip you apart in seconds. They're just brutal. And yeah, it's a brilliant Fifth Doctor story, that is. Eldrad Must Die, very good sequel to The Hand of Fear. Doesn't get spoke about much, but I personally do love it. It's very good, and just the images it creates in your head is marvellous. Then we have Antidote to Oblivion by Philip Martin, where we see Flip and the Sixth Doctor encounter Syl. And yeah, brilliant story, very apocalyptic story. And yeah, the second story from that trilogy is the the Brawn of Eris, by Andrew Smith, which again, brilliant story, reminds me a lot of the Crimes of Thomas Brewster, which again is a fantastic story, along with the Feast of Axos. Then we have another Sixth Doctor story, which is Masters of Earth. Now this is the old Perry, which started with the Widow's Assassin, which again is a fantastic trilogy. Yeah, I guess this is kind of a negative. They haven't actually picked up this arc. They've just left old Perry for, you know, 3 years now. Well, nearly 3 years. So yeah, it's kind of worrying that they've kind of forgot about that, because it did sort of lead you on a sort of a cliffhanger, I guess. As well, the Scavenger left you on a cliff of the Doctor and Flip going to find old Perry, and they haven't resolved that yet. So I'm still on tender hooks whether they'll do that or not. So then we move on to the next trilogy, which is Mistfall, the first story in my first ever proper Big Finish subscription, where we see the Fifth Doctor return to E-Space. And yeah, Mistfall, fantastic story, and definitely does have that 80s vibe. And Equilibrium, the second story, by Matt Fitton, very good story for Turlo, absolutely marvellous. And yeah, a story I didn't reckon much to when they first announced it, but when you listen to it, you're just captivated by it. It's just brilliant, just marvellous story. And if you love Time Works, definitely check it out, because it is just like Time Works with the Fifth Doctor in there. The landscape, you know, the world building within the story is brilliant. And the final story from that trilogy is the Entropy Plague, which is probably the bleakest and most darkest story of the trilogy. It is very creepy, with the monster being the Sandman, which is just absolutely terrifying. They're quite terrifying. Then we move on to the Seventh Doctor story, We Are the Daleks. One of the best stories, and one of the stories I recommend if you want to get into Big Finish. Check out We Are the Daleks, because it is just a great, it just has that 80s vibe, and it just feels very 80s, with it sort of being you know, celebrating 25 years of remembrance of the Daleks, with it being set in 1987. So yeah, it's a brilliant story. And yeah, really creative idea by Jonathan Morris. And the second story from that trilogy, The Warehouse. Again, I didn't reckon much to this story when they first announced it, but when it happened, I was just like, you know what, this is a really good creative story. And yeah, it's a brilliant story. The Seven and Eight Smell trilogy is great. And then we have Crisscross, the introduction story to Constance Clark, who's become quite a prominent figure of recent years for the Sixth Doctor. And yeah, very good story that, if you love your sort of espionage stories, because this story's got sort of two halves within it, and it really utilises its World War II setting. It is very good. Now, I've got to talk about this story because it was the redeeming, made me fall in love with the Fifth Doctor, and that is the Peterloo Massacre. If you haven't checked out my favourite releases from 2016, you'll know that this is #1, and I highly recommend you check that out, because it's got more recommendations on other Big Finish releases. But yeah, Paul Mars did a fantastic job. It is absolutely stunning. It's just a beautiful historical story. I was absolutely dreading it, to be honest, because, you know, 2 hours of the Fifth Doctor, it's not going to be an easy one, but this really changed my perception on the Fifth Doctor, so it's a marvellous story in my eyes. And the last one I'm going to mention is The Two Masters by John Dorney. A superb story. Alex McQueen and Jeffrey Beavers just are on fire. It's just brilliant, just really great, especially part 3, as we get to see sort of the origin of the Crispy Master. And yeah, it's a really great story. Highly recommend The Two Masters. So that brings us up to date with Nick Briggs' sort of time at Big Finish, I guess. We're looking at recommendations. So Nick Briggs has done a lot of good for Big Finish. You know, he's given us this sort of digital download. So when you buy from Big Finish, you get a digital copy of that release. So save waiting for the CD to arrive. You can listen to it straight away on the Big Finish app there, and download it straight from your computer. And you've just got to look how Big Finish have expanded since he's taken over. You just got to look at the website and look at the ranges. You know, you've got Companion Chronicles, which I absolutely love. The Fourth Doctor Adventures. He introduced Tom Baker to Big Finish. You know, there's just so many things, different spin-offs, Jago and Lightfoot. But then that does lead to a negative side, with Big Finish not letting go of ranges. When a range should have died ages ago, they can't let a range just sit and just say, you know what, it was nice doing it, it's time to end it. This brings me on to the point of Bernice. She had, you know, 9 series or 10 series, and then she had a couple of box sets, and that would have been fine. But then they sort of reintroduced and sort of relaunched Benny with the New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield, which is kind of a bad thing, because I don't feel like the first 2 box sets have been great. I mean, granted, they have done something quite new and exciting with introducing the Unbound Dr. David Warner, but it's kind of the point where Big Finish can't let go of characters, which is kind of bad, because you either are ruining their reputation, what they've built up over so many years, or you're just sort of letting them just become quite stagnant, really, which is a bad thing. Right, another example of them not letting go of ranges, like Gallifrey. Gallifrey finished, you know, in like season 6, really, and then they rebooted it with Intervention Earth to get new listeners, and we've had Enemy Lines, now we've got the Gallifrey, the Time War years, which kind of feels like Gallifrey should have been left with Series 6, or, you know, to an extent, Series 3 when they started doing box sets. I feel like that's when they should have thought, you know what, we'll just end it there. And another example is Jago and Lightfoot. Now, if you know me, I love Jago and Lightfoot, but I feel like they've had so many adventures. Like, how can they fit all this in? Really, I feel like Jago and Lightfoot should have finished at Series 6. You know, like, granted, you know, that every series is marvelous and superb, but I feel like Series 6 would have been the perfect place to have stopped it, because obviously they come back from the 1960s and they have, you know, a series of adventures in back in their own time, and then just finish them there. But yeah, I do love Jago and Lightfoot, and yeah, it kind of pains me to say that, but I feel like Jago and Lightfoot should have stopped maybe at box at number 10. You know, that would have been a nice number to have rounded it all off. Really, and that leads me on to another thing. Box sets. Box sets seems to be the big crazy thing with Big Finish. It started with, you know, this like Dark Eyes. Now that leads me on to the 8th Doctor. I'll talk about box sets in a minute while I just remember this point of the 8th Doctor. Now the 8th Doctor seems to be the box set Doctor now, which is kind of a shame, because I would love to see the 8th Doctor return to the main range, because it just adds variety instead of just having the 5th, 6th and 7th Doctor. Not that I'm getting fed up with them, it would just add a bit more variety and spark more interest into the main range, really. And though Dark Eyes, you know, the first box set was marvellous, it was brilliant, but then they thought, we know what, we'll capitalise on that and we'll do another 3 box sets, and then we'll do this other series called Doom Coalition, where you're just kind of losing sight what, you know, the 8th Doctor should be doing. You know, it was fine when it was with Lucy Miller, you know, because it was a little series. Now it's just everything's going to be blockbuster and epic, and yeah, I've kind of lost interest in the 8th Doctor. Not saying there's anything bad with Paul McGann, it's just the story's what he's been given, and hopefully the Time War box, it will hopefully reignite that flame I have for the 8th Doctor. really, because just the stories he's had in like Doom Coalition really killed my enjoyment for the 8th Doctor, because they just didn't know what they were doing with Doom Coalition. It just felt a bit of a mess. I know that's quite an unpopular opinion because everybody seems to love Doom Coalition, but I just found it a bit of a mess of a series. Really, it didn't start to come together until like box set number 3, which is a bit of a shame, really, when you think how much time and money you've invested at that point just to reach, you know, start to get answers and be satisfied with where Doom Coalition is going. So yeah, box set seems to be the big heavy thing. Granted, it's great for new listeners because everything's there in one package. Even the 4th Doctor's going in box set, which is a bit bizarre, considering, you know, he's had like 6 series, just doing fine without it. But yeah, I'm not really a fan of everything being in a box set. It just doesn't seem right because it's just box set after box set. And when they announce a new series, don't worry, we've got 4 box sets coming of this same thing. You know, when they announced John Hurt as the War Doctor, you know, you were guaranteed, you know, they announced 4 box sets, and they're like, but did you know we're doing the 8th Doctor Time War with another 4 box sets? And John Hurt was announced in 2015, and they were planning this, you know, so they were planning this in 2 years in advance. So we're getting an announcement of something what's not going to be out until 2 years. So yeah, it seemed a bit pointless, really. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of them just doing everything in box sets, and it seems like everything's becoming all collected. You know, you just got to go on the website and, you know, you got the 1st Doctor collected, the 2nd Doctor collected. You get the idea, where you can see every range, and apparently the main range is slowly being done away with, and everything's becoming sort of collected into those Doctor sections, which I don't know how to feel about, because the main range is sort of the heart of Doctor Who, because it's hard to say what the main range of Doctor Who is now. But to me, it will always be the monthly range because that was the beginning point. Really, so yeah, there are a few negatives I have with Big Finish, like you know, box sets, you know, because everything seems to be in a box set. You buy some from Big Finish, here, have a box set, or have a slipcase. So yeah, it just seems like they've just gone overboard with the whole box set thing since like the Dark Eyes is sort of the tipping point, really, when they thought, you know what, we'll do everything in box set form. So yeah, that kind of concludes this video. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Sort of a rough overview of the main range throughout the years, and if you want to see more Big Finish years, then comment down below, because I was thinking of doing the companions within this, but I feel like if I did this, it'll be, you know, 2 hours long if I included the companions. So if you want to see a companions Big Finish years, comment that down below and I'll do that in the near future. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video, whatever that will be. So yeah, thank you very much, and bye bye.